Hello and welcome to Fly With Your Shadow, a podcast featuring conversations about the lives of people who make music, including career-based issues like mental health and illness, addictions, uncertainties, and the devastating effect of the COVID pandemic. My name is Jeff Robson, and this show comes to you from my home in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Most of the previous 30 episodes of the show have featured stories told by veterans of the music industry, artists who have been toiling away for decades, who have seen and experienced a lot over the course of those decades. This episode's a little different. We'll hear from an artist who has also experienced a whole lot of highs and lows, but has only just last year released a second album.
I wanna lose my voice, screaming every anthem.
My name's Evangeline Gentle, and I'm a singer-songwriter, and I'm currently based in the Toronto area, in Ontario. I was born in Scotland, though, and I moved to Ontario with my family when I was 11. I think I play Americana music, but I'm definitely in the kind of cross-genre world of like indie pop meets Americana. Identify as queer, and celebrating queer culture is a big part of my music and my live show experience, which I feel really lucky that I get to bring that into my music career. And yeah, I just released a record at the end of 2023 called Where the Diamonds Are.
That 2023 album, Where the Diamonds Are, is a masterpiece, sonically and lyrically. It's melodic and interesting, it's propelled and shaped by producer and master musician Jim Bryson. Jim encouraged Evangeline to make a first professional album and has been a mentor, collaborator, and supporter ever since. But even with all that guidance, talent, and interesting perspective, along with a solid grounding, the rampant difficulties put in place by the old guard in the music industry can throw up roadblocks along the way. Evangeline addresses a lot of this in a powerful track on her album called Underdog.
You tried to make me feel powerless and afraid of you, not a sliver of guilt over what you put me through. Powerless, I'm not giving in, 'cause the sweetest victory is when the underdog wins.
The lyrics in the song allude to a number of incidents that Evangeline has faced, including a traumatic setback in a young career that led to questions about whether music was even the right way to go. Lucky for us, Evangeline pushed through and is preparing for some summer tour dates in Canada and a fall UK tour. You can find out more information at evangelinegentlemusic.com. And of course, I've got links up at flywithyourshadow.com. But first, sit back and listen to my recent conversation with Evangeline Gentle.
The sweetest victory is when the underdog wins.
What can you tell me about that early upbringing? That must have been a bit of a shocker to move to a whole new continent when you were just a kid. What was that like?
Yeah, it definitely was. I mean, it was really exciting as well. We had family that already lived in Canada, and we would come on vacation, and I just remember loving the weather and things like that, coming from the northeast coast of Scotland where it was rainy all the time. Being in Canada felt so amazing because we were just outside all the time, and the summers were gorgeous, so it was exciting, but it was definitely, one of those experiences as a kid where you're just like in a new place, new people, new culture, trying to figure out how to situate yourself. But overall, I'm really happy that we moved to Canada.
Where and when did you find music? How did music become such a big part of your life?
Music's always been a huge part of my life. I feel like I can remember making up songs and stuff when I was like 6 or 7, and just, a huge love of music. Also, I come from a very musical family. Both my sisters, I have 4 sisters, and 2 of them are also musicians and songwriters. And then my dad is also a musician. He's an incredible vocalist, and he was in a band for a long time too. So I just grew up in that environment, but my parents kind of let me come to music on my own terms. And I started writing songs when I was about 12, I think. And it sort of solidified for me around that age that this is what I was going to do with my life, and that It was a vocational thing for me. I actually watched the documentary Shut Up and Sing by the Chicks, formerly known as the Dixie Chicks. And I remember watching that documentary and it was like, oh my God, that's... I guess I didn't realize that you could, be... I guess I still had that like celebrity culture in my mind of like not really humanizing professional musicians. I felt like they were this sort of like, I don't know, something that you couldn't really attain as a normal person. I say with like air quotes. But I watched that movie and seeing these powerful women standing up for what they believe in, incredible musicians, incredible songwriters, and also having families and normal lives. I was like, oh my God, it just all kind of clicked into place for me.
Is that indicative of the kind of music that you were listening to, or was it more the documentary that drew you into that?
I always loved that band. They're my kind of lifelong favorite band. I have bands from childhood that just like spark your love in a different way. But I had been listening to all different kinds of music. Honestly, my dad's really into sort of R&B, Motown. So I was listening to a lot of Marvin Gaye growing up, but also we definitely liked Celtic inspired music. So I was listening to Irish music like Cara Dillon. I don't know if you know that Irish musician, but she's incredible. And then also loving pop music. I had 3 older sisters. So when I was growing up, I listened to a lot of the same music that they were, which was pop music at the time. And, but also loving like 70s folk singer-songwriters. When I was about 12 and had started playing guitar and writing my own songs, my dad bought me Carole King's album Tapestry, and he had written out like all his favorite songs on the album, and he did the same thing for Joni Mitchell's Blue. And so those 2 albums were really kind of formative for me at that time when I was learning how to write songs and stuff.
Yeah, and it's great that you had such strong female role models as well. Obviously, your dad was trying to lead the way or show you some good examples of, what you could achieve with those kinds of things. So when you first started making up songs, were you making up songs like trying to be them, or did you always kind of have your own sense of what you wanted to sound like?
I think I always had my own sense of what I wanted to sound like, and it was very much experimental for me. Like I was learning how to play the guitar, but it was definitely by ear. I mean, I had a poster of guitar chords that I got from a Walmart and had been teaching myself that way, but I was experimenting with open tunings and stuff like that. So a lot of the songs that I was writing when I was like 13, 14 were purely experimental in open tunings, and definitely just me trying to figure out what I wanted to say or what I wanted to sound like, which when you're 13 and 14 is adorable in hindsight, because what you're singing about really is just regurgitation of some of the things you've already heard. But like, there is still that piece there for me where I wanted to convey what I was feeling, You
said that music was always kind of vocational for you. Like, did you kind of set yourself up like straight out of high school to start a music career? Like, were you like the music that I've heard, these couple of albums that you've released, is that kind of the first things that you've done, or were you in bands before that?
Yeah, I've been in bands since I was 14. I went to a music high school in Peterborough, in Ontario, and I played my first show in a bar when I was 14. It was a Saturday matinee, and I remember being so scared to go and ask the promoter if I could play a show there, but he was amazing. His name's Dave Toby. He owned the Spill in Peterborough, which is a really popular touring venue for many musicians. They'll know that venue. And he was like, oh, yeah, definitely you should come play a show. You can play on Saturday. And I made $70 that Saturday, and I remember being like, oh, my God, I could get used to this. I'm rich. $70. Holy crap.
Yeah, but now that you're still making $70, it's not so cool.
Yeah. No, not anymore. No, now it's depressing. But yeah, and then just from there, I was opening for other high school bands. I was in a couple of other little projects, and I made my first EP when I released it when I was 17, and then after that I did a couple of other little EP projects, very DIY, like home studio type stuff with some musicians in Peterborough, and those got locked in the vault though. those are the ones where I'm like, I'm not sure I want to share those with the public now. But those were early projects. And then I think when I finished high school and had some more freedom and space, that was when I was like, okay, I really want to give this a go in some way and tour more and make a professional album. And that was actually around the time that I met Jim Bryson. I think I was maybe 18 or 19 when I met Jim. And he was like, I really want to make a record with you. I see a lot of potential here and I love your songs. Let's do something together. And that kind of took me into more of a professional direction, I would say. But it's always felt vocational to me, honestly, since I was a really young kid.
I want to get back to Jim in a second, but those early recordings that that are locked in the vault, like what would you say the biggest difference or what changed that made it okay for people to hear this stuff between those and that first record you put out?
I guess maybe, like we were saying, finding your own voice versus trying to, or not even intentionally, but sometimes just regurgitating maybe what you think you should be writing and then trying to put a spin on it. It was like, for me, I think I figured out what I wanted to say by that first album. And I had more life experience to draw from and to write about. And there's some songs on the early material that I'm like, actually, you know what? That was impressive for a 16-year-old. Like, I like to look back at it sometimes, but I think that, in 10 years, I might look back at my first record and like the one that is out into the public sphere. I might look at that in 10 years and think, oh, that was a little, that song's a little cringy, or I won't play that one live. Do you know what I mean? I think artists always have that feeling about their older work. And I think that's a sign of like pushing yourself towards improving too as a songwriter and figuring out your voice as time goes on.
I always kind of have this argument with songwriters as well. And I certainly understand that. I don't know if I would want to revisit stuff from 20. I mean, I've been doing a radio show for over 20 years. Listening to the ones from 20 years ago is painful for sure. But I got to believe that when you start releasing music kind of on a wider level, it starts to become part of other people's lives, right? So whether you still stand by that first record or not in 10 years, there are going to be people out there who love that record and it means a lot to them, right? So do you think about that at all? How these songs become part of people's lives or how they affect other people?
I do, and I love that. I think that's for me, thinking about that feels like a very spiritual, mystical part of like the process of making art, in the way that it comes from you, but then all of a sudden it's something totally different for another person, and it takes on its own life once you put it out there. And I definitely take that into account when I'm deciding what I want to play at shows. I mean, there's songs that I've played a million times that sometimes I'm like, oh, I really wish I could not do this one tonight. But at that point, it's like someone might be coming to the show to hear that song because it's meant something to them and has a life of its own within their world. I love that. I think that's part of the unifying quality of music, really. Like seeing just realizing that there's a shared human experience, even if it's not the exact same situation. It's like, oh, the emotion is there. So clearly, we're all having similar experiences as people, I guess, and music kind of translates that.
Did you feel like you were ready for this record, or did it take some coaxing? Like the songs on here, were you proud and confident enough of them, or did it take the kind of the coaching of a Jim Bryson or somebody to help you realize that they were worth putting down and putting out in a wider way?
I would say that those songs I had been collecting for a number of years, because I was 23 by the time that we actually released that record, and we'd started recording it when I was 19. So and I had some of those songs since I was like 17, right? So I think it took working with a producer to help me kind of choose from the collection of songs I had which ones were really standouts for the album, which ones were like good introductions to me as a musician and a person, I guess. But I was mostly just so excited to be making it happen. I will say that part of the reason it took so long was just trying to get the funding and stuff that I wanted to have to be able to release it professionally, and it's such an expensive process. But I feel so fortunate that I've had the support of the Canada Council for the Arts and the Ontario Arts Council for multiple of my projects, and that makes a world of a difference. And as soon as I got that grant, it was like, full steam ahead as far as getting things off the ground.
So tell me about meeting Jim Bryson. Where and when did that happen? Like, did you know who he was at the time, or was it literally him approaching you?
I knew who he was at the time. I had been to a couple of the Folk Music Ontario conferences, and I remember going one year, I think I was 17, and sitting with a friend and her pointing out Jim and saying, "Oh, that's Jim Bryson. He plays with Kathleen Edwards, and he's a great producer," or whatever. And I guess it just like stuck in my mind, but I didn't really think much of it. And then about a year later, he was playing guitar for Tara Williamson, and I was opening the show, and he drove us to Toronto. And I remember just thinking he was really funny and having such a like kind of dry, sarcastic sense of humor. Like I could never tell if he was fully joking or not. And yeah, I just really liked his personality, I guess. And then, yeah, he saw me perform and I guess was impressed by the songs and approached me after. He likes to joke that I'm the only person he's ever actually approached to work with. He usually just lets people come to him. But I'm really grateful that he did. And our artistic collaboration has lasted a number of years. I mean, he did my last record as well. And yeah, he's awesome. He's been a real like mentor for me, but also he's been a protective kind of factor for me in the music industry as well, in that like he's been able to guide me when I'm kind of, I guess, in need of some direction or just not sure, because I don't have the same kind of experience that he's had. He's able to give me that professional opinion sometimes. And then also, yeah, he's just very protective, which I really appreciate, and encouraging. And yeah, it's great. I feel lucky to have him in my life.
When I listen to the two records that you've made together, I can hear a lot of Jim in these songs and the sound. So, was it hard to kind of help him build this sound with you, or did it change that much when he came in with his experience and his vision of it?
No, I think it was kind of just a perfect collaboration of like-minded musical brains, to be honest. I love his the way that he arranges songs and his musical mind. And then also for the most recent record, it's funny, we would kind of get into the studio and then he'd play me a song that he was really into, and we'd listen to it over and over and over again, just appreciating the different parts of that song, and then thinking about like, for this record, let's go in this direction. We wanted to bring more of electronic elements, pop elements into it, but that still feel kind of indie and folk leaning as well. So it's just kind of like a meeting of minds, really. But you can definitely hear him on both of these records for sure, especially like that kind of classic Jim guitar tone that I love.
Your songs, a lot of them seem to be fairly autobiographical, and was that hard for you to reveal parts about your life, or has it always been important to you to reflect who you are in these songs?
It definitely feels vulnerable. There's some songs on the most recent record, especially that are very autobiographical in a way that makes me feel vulnerable. But also, I think those are the songs that people tend to kind of connect with the most, I guess, because I think obviously there's a lot of bravery in being vulnerable and telling a story that's painful to us. But like when one person does that, it kind of gives someone else permission to embrace their own story or remove some of the shame from their own experiences. And so my hope for the songs on the record that were vulnerable to put out, that it meets those people, like that song becomes something to them. And it is cathartic to just kind of bring those topics that make you feel ashamed, to bring them to light. And to me, with songwriting, it's a process of like alchemizing emotions, I would say, trying to turn these like deep wounds or deep joys, whatever it is, alchemizing that into something that feels like an offering, I guess, and a way to connect with people.
People must sometimes interpret things a different way or take things a different way. Sometimes maybe you write a song that you don't feel as strongly about, but then all of a sudden it becomes so meaningful to somebody else, or you kind of were thinking one thing, but somebody interprets it a different way. Are you ever surprised by those things? Have people ever picked up on things in your songs that you didn't even realize were there?
Yeah, maybe, for sure. I think sometimes the lyrics seem pretty straightforward, but there's definitely lots of, for me, like hidden things that only certain people would understand the true context of. But I think, for example, there's the song on my most recent album called "He'll Do It Again," which is about trying to encourage someone to leave an abusive partner. That song for me was written for a family member, but from the perspective of me a long time ago. So someone might experience that as a completely different context that fits into their world, but either way, it still carries that same weight of like, you know, trying to urge someone to leave an abusive partner. And unfortunately, you know, lots of women have had those experiences, men too, and so people can connect to that.
Between the two records, did you do a lot of touring after that first record, or did you play a lot? And if so, like, I've seen you solo and duo, but I know you also do a bunch of band shows around home. Like, what was that experience like, sort of playing that first record? Did you get out there and play it a lot?
Well, I didn't really have much of a chance to get out and tour that record because we put it out in 2020, September. Yeah, September 2020. We had plans to do a lot of touring, and I had gotten an agent lined up and all of this stuff, and then the pandemic happened, and yeah, just all the touring plans fell apart. But yeah, I honestly, I would love to do more touring. I think now, post-pandemic, and with just how expensive touring is and things like that, it's getting harder to tour as a full band at kind of the level I'm currently at. So I always feel so grateful for the shows that I do have with my band, but they're mostly in Ontario, although we are coming to Winnipeg for the Trout Forest Music Festival, which I'm really excited about. And then yeah, but mostly it's been touring solo or a duo.
So I know a lot of people who released records kind of around that pandemic time and then didn't really get the opportunity to get the feedback from it or kind of go and spread that message quite as much. Was that a big disappointment for you? Did that feel, you know, like that record kind of died just because of the timing? Or was that, you know, all part of the process?
For me, I actually feel like I felt good about the kind of response that my first record had. It definitely had more of a response than I could have ever anticipated, especially during a pandemic. But I feel like maybe the quietness of the market at the time sort of made way for my record to have opportunities that it might not have otherwise. For example, I was interviewed on NPR, Weekend Edition with Scott Simon, which was a huge opportunity. And I had been working with some really incredible PR agents in the States. And I had a full team at that time as well. So honestly, that first record for me, when it was released and I was getting all of these different kind of press opportunities in markets outside of Canada, I was just thrilled. I mean, I was devastated when the touring was canceled. But I just felt so much gratitude that even amidst the pandemic, something could still come out of it. And yeah, it reached people, which was the goal.
when it came time to make the second one, the second one is so much, it's kind of bigger and bolder in a lot of ways, right? Like it's from the artwork to the songs to the production, everything seems to be kind of turned up a little bit more. Was that more of an intention going in, or is that just kind of the way it happened?
I think maybe the bigger and the maybe more like refined, I guess, sound of the second album is just a reflection of maybe like my maturation as a songwriter, as an artist, and just wanting to kind of challenge myself to do something not necessarily better, but just more of higher quality in certain ways. You know what I mean? Like to kind of take more risks and go into areas that didn't feel as comfortable for me, but that feel like artistically energizing. And yeah, I just wanted to take more risks with this album. And I think too, after having some experiences in the music industry that were really difficult for me and that were traumatic, to be quite honest with you, it felt like a reclamation of some power for me to take those artistic risks and to be more unapologetic. It's kind of like when you realize that you can't please everybody, and it's this really harsh reminder from the universe or something, like, you know, there's an event or something that takes place and you just have to come to terms with the fact, like, okay, you're not going to please everybody, and you've been knocked down, but you've, you know, gotten back up again, and you're back in the studio. What's the point in getting back in the studio if you're just going to be thinking about trying to please an audience or whatever? It needed to be a powerful thing, an empowering experience for me, I should say. And so that involved being bolder. Yeah, a bit more shameless.
Without digging too hard, but it sounds like you had opportunities that you kind of expected to go one way, but they didn't. Is that the kind of thing we're talking about here, where you were led to believe that something was going to work out that ended up not working out? Is that the kind of disappointment or struggle?
Yeah, along those lines for sure. And I mean, I also experienced just some things that were rooted in kind of the classic music industry sexism that unfortunately so many young female artists know well and have been hurt by. And so that was something that happened to me after my first record came out. And so in the years of writing the second one, it was recovering from that experience, trying to decide if I was going to continue doing music or if it was sort of, you know, the end of the road for me there. And yeah, I mean, I can't really get into too much detail about it, but I'm definitely grateful for the experience because I'm a much stronger person after it and know myself so much better. And yeah, I really believe in kind of the universal way of things, I guess. Like, things happen and it seems terrible and devastating, but then years down the line you can kind of look back and see how that experience led you to so many other abundant experiences, and then it just fills me with some gratitude. Yeah,
I don't know if you can help me out here and talk like in general terms about some of the things that you think work against you as a woman that a guy might not run into. Like, what kinds of things are we talking about in terms of the way the industry is structured that make you have to work harder or overcome something that somebody else might not?
I think that there's some really toxic structures of power in the music industry that it's getting better for sure. We're seeing more women in positions of power in the music industry, but I think we're still kind of recycling some of the old power structures of, like, you have male gatekeepers at the top. They come in, they promise you certain things with your career. They hold a lot of influence in the industry. They have the power to kind of block you from having further opportunities if you cross them, or if you hold them accountable for poor behavior, or for kind of wielding their power in really unethical ways. And unfortunately, in the music industry, I think it's a wider issue of a scarcity mentality that people have. It's the idea that there's only so many opportunities for women and queer people, for example. I'm just going to use those two groups, but that there's fewer opportunities for them to be successful. So then everyone's kind of fighting to get those opportunities. But what happens is, when there's the scarcity mentality, people are willing to, or not necessarily willing, but you can compromise your values in different situations, or you can become hyperfixated in a way on getting the opportunities versus staying true to what's authentic to you. And I think for people in these positions of power, these gatekeepers, they're used to being able to like dine on that sense of make or break someone's career in a way. And not all people in the music industry operate like that, but definitely some. And it's hard to challenge those people. It's hard to use your voice when you're a young emerging artist and you don't want to rock the boat in fear of what that might do to your career. And so I've definitely experienced that, and I can't get into the details of what my experience was, but it's just a very common experience. Lots of women have had it, and it needs to change in the music industry. I think that collectively, every single person in the music industry has a role to play in that too, of the more that we kind of speak up about this stuff, the more that we hold each other to better standards, and not fearing kind of the professional consequences of that, the more change we're going to see. And also, when we started this interview, we were talking about how the podcast had started about mental health and in the music industry in particular. And these kinds of unethical structures of power that get, industry professionals successful and wealthy and have sustainable careers while the artists are taken advantage of. That is what breeds a lot, in my personal opinion anyway, that creates a culture of depression and anxiety, scarcity mentality, low self-esteem for musicians. So it's not surprising to me that depression is something that so many artists struggle with when the industry looks the way that it does. But I do think it's changing for the better, and I am excited about that.
But I mean, we're also talking about, your job is perfect for people who are sensitive in the first place. You're sensitive, introspective people who often sometimes kind of lack confidence in a way. I think a lot of musicians do. And so it makes it harder for you to kind of be vulnerable and speak up for yourself and all these things that you're talking about, right? Like, and that kind of, then the structure of the music industry and how it's so difficult in the first place just kind of feeds off that perceived weakness. I think, you see people, and then there are people in positions of power who feel like they can control you.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, musicians generally, we're artists, and a lot of the times artists' brains aren't necessarily wired into this kind of business capitalist-y mindset of like turning the art into a product to be sold and things like that, which is part of having a sustainable music career. And so it's like, you just got to get on board if that's what you want. But I think there's a way to do it that still honors the artist and still honors that that's a real person, and they have, they're not just a product. it's like the art is the product, but the artist is not the product. And I think we're in a time right now where a lot of those boundaries are very blurred, and it can really dehumanize the artist.
So something else that came out more in the forefront with this second record more than the first one was that celebration of your queerness that you spoke of earlier. Was there a risk, or has there been any kind of fight back against you sort of being more vocal about that part of who you are?
No, actually, and I think we're in a really exciting time right now for queer music. There's a growing audience for it, I would say, or a growing market. I mean, the number one song on the international or the global Spotify charts right now is Lunch by Billie Eilish. I'm not sure if you've heard it, but it's a really overtly queer pop song. It's amazing. But I think there's a growing space for that. And actually, when I was younger, that was when I was receiving more pushback from, I think, industry people saying, like, you know, you don't want to sort of pigeonhole yourself into that, because which is a fair statement, I would say, in some ways. But I think it's because a lot of people at that time didn't realize that, like, there's a lot of people waiting to hear this kind of music. There's a lot of people who are going to be thrilled to hear their stories shared in music so overtly, not hiding at all, like in complete celebration. And I feel that as a queer artist, whenever I listen to queer musicians that are telling stories that relate to me right now, I can think of a few bands right now. One is Muna. I'm not sure if you've ever heard them, but they're a queer pop band. They're incredible. There's Fletcher, Chapel Rowan. Chapel Rowan's now on Top 40 radio, and she is a queer pop artist, and she is very explicit about being queer and celebrating queer culture. So I think, like, just because it's never been done before doesn't mean that market isn't there. And for me, as someone who has experienced a lot of internalized homophobia throughout my life, writing music that's explicitly queer and celebrating queerness is a way for me to process that internalized homophobia. It's very therapeutic, because it's hard to be ashamed of something that you get up and sing and dance about. You know what I mean?
So it's very empowering then as well to go and tell these stories in that way and find people hearing themselves in your songs, I would imagine.
Yeah, exactly, for sure. And it's empowering for me and empowering for the people who are listening to the music, and it creates a real sense of community as well. I'm noticing more that at my live shows, the draw of queer people has been steadily increasing, which is so exciting. And just seeing how much it means to them too to be in a room full of other queer people listening to music that celebrates them. It's just a nice vibe, you know, like it creates a good vibe, but it's a nice mix of people too, because it's not just queer people that come to my shows either. Like, it's the sentiment of the music that matters the most, the emotion in it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but do you also see, playing to a heterosexual audience, do you see people's minds opening? Do you have people coming up to you and sort of finding that they're more accepting than maybe they thought they were, or learning something from you as a result?
I'm not really sure if I can say that I've ever had any explicit experiences of people coming up to me and telling me that I've opened their mind more, or that I've taught them something necessarily, but I've had so many experiences where I'm looking out at the audience and I'm not sure how my jokes are going to land. Sometimes I like to make like jokes about being gay or whatever, you know, and things like that. And I'm not sure how my jokes are going to land, but they land really well. And people get on board with it and they embrace it. And those moments are so special, because they kind of challenge some of the fear that I might have of going in expecting to maybe not be as well received as I am. I get it's hard to explain, but it's such a nice feeling when that happens.
So this record's been out for a while. My biggest problem, my biggest frustration with you, and maybe you can explain this to me. You can't buy the damn thing anywhere, as far as I can tell, except I found it on iTunes today. Sometimes I forget that iTunes still exists, but I can buy it there. But it's not even on Bandcamp. What's up with that? What?
I know. I still have yet to get some vinyl printed. It's expensive to print vinyl.
No, I get that completely, but put it up on Bandcamp. Like,
I know. You're so right. You're reminding me in this very interview right now that this is what I need to do tonight. Get that album on Bandcamp. I know. I have the.
It's a weird way to release a record. I'm just saying.
Oh, it's a super weird way to release a record. It's a way to release a record and make no money.
Well, yeah, and I was going to say it sounds so great. And I know you made it with Jim, so I'm sure you got a good deal, because Jim doesn't want to make money the way that other people do, it seems. But obviously a lot of time and money went into this thing, and there's investment there. So, some people would want to try to get some of that back. Is all I'm saying. Yeah,
for sure. I'm definitely going to get some vinyl printed for touring this summer and this fall. And you just wait. By the end of the week, it'll be on Bandcamp.
I'm looking forward to it already. It's so good. And, I put it on my list of my favorite things of last year and stuff. And I was like, I don't know where you can buy it, but you should go listen to it anyway.
Well, you know what? Once I do get the vinyl in, I'll mail you a copy. You'll be the first.
I'm very excited about that, because seriously, I think it's so great. And especially in a year like last year when this thing came out, everybody was talking about Boy Genius and how great that was. And I kept listening to your record and going, but this one is, I don't know, to me it's better. I've said it a million times. I like this one better than that one. And I feel like, there's people with the right kind of sentiment just waiting to hear your record. And I hope more people get to hear it, I guess, is what I'm trying to say in an awkward way.
Me too. I hope that as well. I think this was a total indie release for that second record. And so it definitely had less teams supporting it, like internationally and things like that. So the audience just generally was smaller for it. But I'm really excited to be putting out some new dance remix versions of some of the songs from that record. I've been working with a producer, an East Coast producer. His name's Daniel Adams. He's amazing, and he's taken Bad Girls and Gay Bar and turned them into dance pop songs, which is really fun. And so I'm hoping that kind of brings some new life into the record and kind of gets it out there a bit more again. And I'll get it up on Bandcamp and get some vinyl on the go and get my shit together. Releasing an album independently, it's a lot of work.
But I mean, you've certainly had a lot going on too, right? Like, didn't you finish school and get a job and all these other things all at the same time?
I did. I'm kind of crazy that way. I always feel, I definitely have raging ADHD in the sense that I always have way too much on the go at all times. I did go to school. I was in college for child and youth work. And now I work at a mental health, in a mental health program for youth with addiction and substance abuse issues. And it's amazing because it's a great addition to my life. I think the thing with being a musician right now that's also kind of challenging for the mental health of artists is that, like, being able to do music full time is not as easy as it once was. I remember when I was with a record label, and my manager at the time said to me, if this was the 90s, you probably would have been able to buy a house by now based on your sales and your streaming stuff. And I was like, that's the most depressing thing I think anyone has ever said to me in my whole life. Like, I could buy a house? Oh my God. So I felt like I needed to create something for myself that was sustainable, in the form of another part of my career, and to just feel more resourced to be able to do more music, I guess. And so that's definitely been the priority for the last year or so, I would say. But I'm in a really good space with that now, and I'm so excited to be writing. I'm writing another record, which I'm hoping to start recording at the end of this year. early next year and kind of just keep building on what's already here. And yeah.
Well, I know that the typical industry wisdom would be to like not work full time, but to be out there, you know, pushing this record and doing all that stuff. But there's got to be a bit of an advantage as well to doing it kind of on your own terms and not feeling forced to do any and every gig and not feeling forced to sell yourself quite so much, but to give it time as well. I guess there's got to be some advantage to that as well.
I mean, for me, it's the advantage of not being homeless. You know, like I have an actual income and I have a reliable vehicle. So when I do get a show offer, it's like, yeah, no problem. I can drive myself to different opportunities. I have the money to front the cost of flights. If I get an offer tomorrow that's like, will you come play this show in Germany or something? I have the money to be able to just do that for myself. Whereas before, that just wasn't the case. And I think a lot of musicians get into huge amounts of debt trying to fund touring and things right now. And it's just, for some people, not as that money for that is just not as readily available, you know? And for me, that was the case. So just setting myself up in a way where my basic needs are met makes me feel resourced enough that I want to create more art and find those other opportunities.
But yours is also not a job that you can probably just take a couple months off, right? Like you're working directly with these young people who come to count on you. You can't just take off for a while, I would imagine, right? You're a little bit more connected to that than you are if you were working at the music store or the coffee shop, right?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. I mean, the good thing is that I do get paid vacation from my work, which is really nice. And, you know, my, the work culture where I'm at is so awesome and supportive. But yeah, I'm definitely emotionally invested in this job in a really intense way. I think for me, after the really traumatic experience I had in the music industry, it just shifted it changed my life, really. It changed my worldviews and I think like I just couldn't go from that experience and healing from that experience, which took everything in me, honestly, to then living an existence of full-time caring about how many followers I had on TikTok or creating TikTok content and stuff like that. Like that just did not feel meaningful to me, I guess, in the same way as working with teenagers right now. I just needed more, and I think people we're so multi-dimensional. We have different talents, different ways to offer our gifts, and I get to do music stuff with the kids that I work with, and they're all so highly creative themselves. There's got to be some type of correlation between being highly intelligent and highly creative and also having a higher likelihood of developing substance abuse issues and mental health issues, because every single teenager that I work with is so creative. It's mind-blowing. And so when I'm at my job, I also get to encourage that creative energy in them too, and show them and support them in using art as a way to heal as well. And so I feel like I'm in a really great place right now where these two areas of my life intersect in a beautiful way, but that also feels so rewarding in their own ways too.
It sounds like though music is the goal. Like at some point, do you see yourself having to choose music full time? Would that be like, if that right offer or that right opportunity came up, would you be okay with kind of not doing that other work? Or would you still find a way to do it? Like, how would that work?
I think if it got to the point where, you know, my career took off in a way that I could be touring full time or regularly, I would definitely, that would be the direction that I would go in. But I'm very invested in using my career to support youth and and to support those kinds of initiatives, like programs like that. And so I think it would just, my role in that program would just shift in a way. I would try to figure out like how I could bring more music programming specifically to an organization like that. Or, yeah, I think I'm always going to want to bring that social activism or that kind of therapeutic type stuff with my career, you know, however form that takes. Like, if an artist takes off, say, and they start having a much bigger platform, they also have an opportunity to use that platform to support different issues that matter to them. And for me, that is youth mental health. So, yeah, does that make sense? Like, it's always going to be present in my career. It's just it could just shapeshift, I guess, depending on what happens.
So you said that you had started writing towards another record. Is it too early to tell sort of what direction that's going to go in? Is it going to be that much different from what we've heard before?
I think it's going to be more experimenting in the kind of pop realm of things, and still with the like Americana sensibilities, though that's always just present in the way that I write music. But I'm definitely excited to kind of do something a little bit different with this next record, but it still feels like early days. Yeah, I'm just not sure exactly where it's going to go, but I'm excited to find out, and I feel really motivated to get there, which is nice.
And do you foresee working with Jim some more, either on this one or in the future, or is it time to kind of go in a different direction?
I would love to work with Jim. I would, for this next record, I'm going to be working with a different producer, but I still want Jim to be involved in the project, you know, playing on the songs and contributing his musical genius to the project. I don't really foresee a time in the future where Jim's not involved in my artistic process in some way. We're a good match, you know?
I've been to dark places, but I've been kissed by high vibration. Can't steal these high vibes.
Now, despite my best efforts in there, you heard me, the good-natured ribbing, Where the Diamonds Are, is still not available on Bandcamp as of the release of this episode. But I encourage you to visit Evangeline's page at evangelinegentle.bandcamp.com to see if it's there, or visit evangelinegentlemusic.com for links to other places where you can hear the record. If you want to support Evangeline and pay for the music like all good-hearted music lovers should, it's available on the iTunes store. Remember the iTunes store? I've got links to all those places and more information up at flywithyourshadow.com. Coming up soon, you'll hear more of my conversation with Evangeline Gentle on my radio show, Tell the Band to Go Home. You can find that at tellthebandtogohome.com or pretty much wherever you got this podcast. In that bonus conversation, we'll talk about a couple of my favorite festivals in the world, including one that Evangeline is visiting for the very first time this summer, the Trout Forest Music Festival in Ear Falls, Ontario. That, my friends, is truly a hidden gem of a festival. Evangeline is scheduled to be there with a full band August 9th to 11th, and you can find out more about it at troutfest.com. I hope to see you there. Fly With Your Shadow is and always will be free and without ads or requests for any money. The one thing that you could do to help support the show is to share this episode with people who might enjoy it. Finding new listeners is the biggest challenge for me, so your help would be greatly appreciated. I'd love it if you'd take a minute to tell someone about the show or share a link with your followers and friends on social media. I really appreciate hearing from listeners. If you have any questions or comments or feedback or suggestions, drop me a line at flywithyourshadow@gmail.com. My name is Jeff Robson, and I sincerely thank you for taking the time to listen. I hope you'll join me again on the next episode of Fly With Your Shadow.